Atlanta Science Tavern. I'm just giving you about a 5 to 7 minute warning, so we're going to get started in about 5 to 7 minutes. So see y'all in a bit. How do I? Okay. in the right spot? All right. Hey, all. Thanks for coming. Who's excited about science? Woo! Thank you for that. We've never had an introduction that exciting. My name's Amy Sharma. I'm the Executive Director of Science for Georgia, and I'd really like to welcome you to a pretty awesome Atlanta Science Tavern. And this isn't on. Oh no. Hold on, we're loading. All right, so while technology catches up with me, I have to tell you shamelessly about Science for Georgia because that's how we roll. Science for Georgia was founded in 2018. The co-founders are in the room today, Lewis and Brandy. I've now publicly called them out. Raise your hand, Lewis. A group of science-friendly people trying to make a difference. So we do three things. We train scientists in science communication training, so that way they can learn to use small words and pictures. It goes very well. We then increase the public engagement with science. So that is why we are here tonight. We like to come out, we like to be a part of the community, talking in bars, having outreach events, doing science comedy shows, just to make us get out of the house. And then the third thing we do is we advocate for the responsible use of science in public policy. So we are down talking to the Georgia General Assembly and making sure science has a seat at the table. What you're going to see tonight is kind of an intersection of those two goals. But just to kind of show you how we do this in practice, right? This is us with our classes. We're out there teaching scientists how to talk. We have super fun events, but then we bring a bunch of people to the table. So we had a seminar series. We got the Lieutenant Governor to come, the previous one, so yay. And like the head of the Chamber of Commerce and a couple academics to kind of talk about education and workforce from like a very all different perspectives. That's what we like to do. And we hold the Environmental Justice and Climate Protection Conference every year. Super exciting stuff. And then we have roundtables where we really sit down and think about what are the evidence-based solutions that we can do to make a difference. We have book drives. We are down getting resolutions passed and bills passed. And we help by making sure science has a seat at the table. So we write open letters from the science community to kind of back up important things that are happening, so that way we know this is kind of what the community is saying about it. So, if you think that's awesome, which you should, you can totally join our listserv and be a part of the fun. That would be great. We would appreciate that. You should come to more events. We have an event calendar now. I don't know why it took us like 5 years to make one on the internet, but we finally joined the 21st century. So we're very excited about it. But if you sign up for our event calendar, you can make sure not to miss any of these super cool things that are happening. For example, you can watch one of our amazing creative employees, Michael, humiliate themselves on this great short video about how a bill becomes law. It's going to be awesome. We're premiering this in 12 days on September 7th on YouTube. We have the scavenger hunt to the sea going on, so you can come learn about Georgia's waterways all across the state. More importantly, you can win a $250 gift card. So you should do that, because that would be really awesome. And then finally, at the end of September, we have our favorite event of the year, Scitoberfest. Nerd networking at its best. We get together, we drink beer, we eat tacos, and we talk about science. This year we have Dr. Dennis Leota from Emory, and we're super excited to have him talk. So, there you go. Subscribe to our event calendar. It will make your life easier. All right, finally, we can't do this without the support of the beautiful people sitting in this room. So please be generous and donate today. Thank you. So also, huge thank you to Manuel's Tavern for letting this happen. So thank you, Manuel's. Be nice to David. He's having a great day. Yeah, see? So finally, let's get to our talk. I'm very excited about this talk, mainly because it features one of our interns, so it's always really exciting. It's like you're proud of your children doing something awesome. So I'm proud of our interns when they do really cool things. And I have to look up her bio because I can't remember anything if I don't write it down. Sierra Walsh is a fourth year, which some people call seniors, but not anymore, at Kennesaw State. She started as an environmental science student, but then she fell in love with Geographic Information Systems, or GIS. And we're super excited that she fell in love with GIS because she came to work with us this summer making a map about environmental justice and where the overlap of environmental issues are compared to the socioeconomic status of the people that live in this state. And we are super happy to have her here. She is a superstar intern. I'm just bragging about you now, but we're really happy we have Sierra with us, so please welcome her. Woo! Let me get this is yours.
Okay.
I'll get your slides up.
Is the microphone working? Yeah. Okay. Hi guys, I'm Sierra. Today I'm going to talk to you about environmental justice in hazardous waste cleanups. So, yeah. So to start, what is environmental justice and why should we care about it? Environmental justice is basically the concept that I'm sorry, I'm so nervous. Basically the concept that there are socioeconomic, geographic, and demographic factors that would cause some people to be more at risk to negative consequences as a result of environmental degradation. So we want to do everything we can to prevent that and level the playing field and make sure that everybody has the same access to everything and that some people are not, or that we work against we work against the disadvantages that some people have. So yeah. What's our problem and why are we doing this? The Georgia State Legislature has several trust funds that are designated for certain things. For example, the Georgia Hazardous Waste Trust Fund is something that, when you buy tires, you put a couple dollars into the Hazardous Waste Trust Fund, and in theory, those couple dollars should go back to making sure your tires get disposed of properly, and that money should go into hazardous waste cleanups. But for a long time, there was no law requiring the Georgia legislature to use the funds for the things that they were technically designated for. So after 15 to 20 years of a really long and good fight from a ton of coalitions, including the Georgia Water Coalition, who we are working with on this project. Yeah. They fought really hard and they were able to get a law passed that trust funds had to be used for the things that they were technically designated for. But there's still another problem. There is money for hazardous waste cleanups, but there's not enough money for all the hazardous waste sites that need to be cleaned up in the state. So the Georgia Environmental Protection Division created a prioritization list to basically ensure that the sites that need funding the most get cleaned up first and get the funding to get cleaned up. But the Georgia Water Coalition noticed that there's no concern for environmental justice in that current prioritization system. So it only takes environmental concerns into account and the actual physical effects of environmental degradation with hazardous waste cleanups, but we're not looking at all currently at how certain people might be more affected by the negative consequences of hazardous waste. So we wanted to make a map and make a tool to basically compare and see what people might be more disadvantaged and how we could help those people with the fund and how that compares to the current prioritization system of the EPD. So here's our roadmap to success. Step 1, we created a map just to see what resources were out there, visualize where hazardous waste sites are, where our Georgia Water Coalition partners are, and where people might be more burdened by environmental justice concerns. And then in step 2, we worked on creating our own environmental justice index so that we could contextualize all that information and look at it through the lens of environmental justice and apply it to the prioritization that the EPD has. And then step 3, we're revising the index, making it better, moving on to bigger and better things. So, step 1 was composing our map, and I'm gonna talk you guys through the map and then give you a little demo of it. So I've got it broken down into 3 categories of different layers on the map. The first category being our environmental indicators. So the red, yellow, and green dots that you see are the different hazardous waste sites in Georgia that are recognized by the EPD currently. They're designated in 3 different categories, either responsible party, which is a site where the party responsible for the hazardous waste site is still present in the picture and providing funding and responsible for the cleanup effort. So those are pretty low in terms of priority for funding. Green are public landfills. These are state-owned and public sites that do not have designated funding from a specific party. And then abandoned sites are sites where there was a responsible party that just left the site to go on its own. And so the public landfills and especially abandoned sites are pretty high priority in the EPD's current ranking system. The black dots on the map are the Georgia Water Coalition members. We want to make sure that people are able to see what organizations might be able to help them with advocacy in their area when they look at the map and see, how they might be disadvantaged compared to other communities. And then the blue lines outline Georgia's river basins, which for anyone who might not know, a river basin is just an area where all of the groundwater and surface water run into a single point. So with concern to hazardous waste, runoff and pollution from hazardous waste sites are a huge problem with contaminating groundwater resources. So we definitely want to be cognizant of where those sites are in relation to our river basins. Our next slide is demographic indicators. So these are the demographic factors that would contribute to environmental justice concerns or describe environmental justice concerns in the state. For this, we used the EPA's environmental justice screen tool. This tool has a bunch of different categories. You can go online and play around with it. It's really cool. But you can only look at okay. Yeah, I guess I'll just keep talking about it. You can only look at one factor at a time with the environmental justice screen, and things are represented by percentiles in census tracts. So it's a really cool way to look at really specific information at a really small scale. But it can be a little bit complex to look at, so we used other tools as well to create our index and create our map, and kind of combine them together to make something a little more easy to understand. And okay, yeah, I guess I have more to say about it. I guess you guys can see other screens. But the environmental justice screen has 7 different demographic factors that it actually represents. We chose to use one of their demographic indexes on our map, but I'm going to give you guys a QR code and a link to the actual map. So if you wanted to play around with the full functionality, you can look at any of the factors in the EJ screen. Like I said, this is their demographic index, but you could also look at the unemployment rate, linguistic isolation, limited high school education, population under 5, population over 64, non-white population percentage, and then also low income percentages are on there. So those are our demographic indicators. And then the last thing we used was this really cool tool that the Biden administration created in 2020. It is called the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. It's basically the update to the EJ screen. So this has a super wide variety of things that it looks at to see what census tracts might be more burdened than others. It actually looks at 8 different categories of factors, and each category has several different factors in it. So I'm going to get more into the nitty-gritty on those categories and stuff later. I'm not going to list them all right now. But the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool basically identifies census tracts as either disadvantaged or not disadvantaged, and it's a pretty black and white way to look at everything. So we definitely wanted to look at this as a jumping off point. It's a super robust data set and really cool tool, but we thought we could make it better, and that's why we went to make our own. And I don't know, now is when I would like to look at the map, but can we do it? Okay, cool. So I'm going to take you guys on a little tour through the map itself so you can kind of see like how you could mess around with it after this if you were interested. So this is the story map we've been looking at. It kind of says everything that I've said in this talk, but in a much more flowery and lengthy way. So, oh my god. Okay. You can look through this story map. You can kind of look at the breakdown that I just gave you guys of all the different indicators and all the different layers. And then you can see the whole map here. But what's really cool is at the bottom, you can see the interactive tools that we have. So this app gives you the full functionality of the map. You can zoom around. You can play with turning layers on and off. So if you look here, and maybe you wanted to look at the river basins, but they're turned off here, you could turn them back on. If the map looks really jumbled to you and you want to just be able to look at one thing, maybe you only want to look at the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, then you could turn all the other layers off and just have that on. You can search for locations, so if you wanted to see like our location now and see the closest hazardous waste site to you, you could do that. And then up here we have the legend, so whichever layers you have turned on or off will pop up on this legend. Yeah, and you can see some cool pop-ups in here as well. I'm going to turn everything back on. But if you clicked on a specific census tract that was disadvantaged, I'm actually going to turn these off. Yeah, if you click on a specific census tract that is burdened, it'll pop up exactly why they consider it disadvantaged. It tells you every single category that it met the criteria for being disadvantaged in, and then you can look at graphs, you can look at other information, and it's a pretty cool way to get more into the like specific data of this layer. And if you zoom in a little bit more, you can see that EJ screen tool. We basically just wanted to make it so that it only popped up at a closer extent, because it can be kind of hard to understand at like a more zoomed out extent. It's just a little bit, I don't really know how to scroll around on this laptop. Oh, cool. But yeah, you can see all the different census tracts here, and if you expand this layer, you can look at different factors. Like I said, we have the demographic index turned on, but you could look at whatever factor you wanted to in this list. So this is the people of color population. You could look at linguistic isolation. And yeah, it's just a really cool way to get a little bit more into the specific environmental justice data and see it all laid out instead of having to look at those pop-ups in the climate and economic justice screening tool. So we've got a couple different ways for you to be able to see what's going on. And yeah, I encourage everybody to look at it and play around with it after the talk. And then, where's this? Cool. So, back to the slides. Step 2, after we created our map with information that was already out there, was creating our own index, pull everything together, take the best parts of the EJ screen, the best parts of the CEJST, and just make a few tweaks that we thought would make it serve our purposes a little bit better. So, this was our first iteration of our environmental justice mapping tool. It's a really basic graph. It was the first iteration of it, but we basically heard criticism and feedback that some people think the EJ screen is a little bit too specific. You get really into the nitty-gritty of those specific demographic factors, but you don't take the actual environmental and like physical effects of environmental degradation into consideration with that tool. And then with the CEJST, we got feedback that it was a little bit too broad. There's so many categories represented, and census tracts are identified either as disadvantaged or not disadvantaged, so it's a little bit too black and white for some people. So we wanted to make something that still took those demographic concerns into account, and also took some of those broader categories from the CEJST into account. And we wanted to show it on a graded color scale because it's a little bit easier for people to just look at and get the information they want right away, as opposed to having to click through and search for the information that you're looking for. So the way that we came up with our score is we actually built off the CEJST. Like I said, there's 8 buckets or categories in the CEJST of different burden factors. Each of those buckets contains several different factors, and if one of those buckets is, like, if the threshold for one of those buckets is met, then the census tract is considered disadvantaged. And if several of those are met, then it's still considered disadvantaged, but it's pretty much just one or the other. So you can get a score of 0 for not disadvantaged or 1 for disadvantaged. And we combined those for all the 8 different buckets. And then we also added a 9th bucket to represent race, and I'll talk more about why we did that later. But we put that in as a percentage, so that value is between 0 and 1, and the scores ultimately were between 0 and 9. If you were burdened for every single category, then your score would be an 8, and then the percentage, the non-white population percentage, would also be in there, so the highest score you could get would be, I guess, a 9, or like an 8.99. So I want to explain the CEJST bucket system and why we're trying to move away from that and how we're going to move forward from that. The bucket system is cool for being able to show a lot of information in a really digestible way. Like I said, 8 buckets, but each one represents several different factors. And if the threshold for one of those factors is met, then a census tract would receive a score of 1 for that category. So your bucket can either be completely full, 1 if you're disadvantaged, or 0, completely empty if you're not disadvantaged. The problem is, if one census tract is burdened by 3 factors in one of the buckets, and another census tract is burdened by only 1 factor in that bucket, they both receive the same score of 1. So it's not really descriptive of the actual burden that places might realistically face. So we wanted to change that and break it down, and I'll get into that a little bit more later. But these are the 8 buckets that we're looking at with the CEJST. Climate change, energy, health, housing, legacy pollution, transportation, wastewater and water, and then workforce development. And the way that the threshold that has to be met for a bucket to be considered disadvantaged is it has to be in the 90th percentile for any one factor in a bucket. So when we get to these next slides talking about the buckets themselves, you can already see here how, you know, it's not super descriptive or accurate to what disadvantages a community might be facing. In the climate change bucket, for example, if one census tract experienced only a high expected agricultural loss rate, they would receive the same score for a census tract that received the 90th percentile score for every single one of those categories. So we just want to make it a little bit more descriptive of the actual data and burdens that people might be facing. So yeah, these are the climate change and energy factors. Health and housing are up here. And another thing you might notice while we scroll through these is that not every bucket has the same number of factors either. So when you break those down, things might not be weighted equally. Say we wanted to give a score between 0 and 1 for how burdened a census tract might be. That score for housing would be basically a score of 1 through 5, or 0.2 through 1. And for health, there's only 4 factors, so it would be 0.25 through 1, and it kind of gives an uneven weighting to things. So we also want to figure out a way to make things weighted more equally across the buckets, or just assess like how weighting the buckets differently might affect the outcome. But yeah, these are the legacy pollution and transportation buckets. And then lastly, we have water and wastewater and workforce development. And workforce development actually represents almost all of the categories that were in the environmental justice screening tool. Another thing that's represented in all of these buckets is the consideration of low-income communities. In order to be considered disadvantaged in any factor, any bucket, not only does the census tract have to meet the 90th percentile requirement, but they also have to be in the 65th percentile for low income. So the low income consideration is built directly into this. The only consideration from the environmental justice screening tool that is not in the CEJST currently is the consideration of race. And we wanted to add that back in because we did get feedback at the environmental justice conference we had in the summer and from some partners that, you know, we want to make sure that we don't move too far away from the reality that race plays a big role in how disadvantaged a community might be. with a really long history of segregation and racism in the US, it's just impossible to ignore that those things permeate in our day-to-day lives. And a lot of these categories represent the explicit burden that race places on people, but there's still implicit burden that people face every day, that we wanted to represent in a separate category. So in our tool, this category is a value of 0 to 1. The non-white population percentage is put into the score directly. And when we were deciding how to do this, we were trying to think what the best way to represent race might be. In the rest of the tool, in all of the buckets, you have to meet a certain threshold to receive a score of 1. So you could do that, but it's pretty hard to come up with a threshold of exactly what percentage of non-white population classifies a community as burdened or not burdened. So we didn't really want to touch that. You could just use the raw percentage to represent the non-white population. And then the last option would be to multiply that by some factor if you wanted to give it a little bit more weight. We didn't want to do that, and we went with option 2 because we just wanted to represent, like I said, that implicit burden, because we know that explicit racial burdens are already kind of built in to all of the factors in the other buckets. So this kind of just shows that there is a positive correlation and kind of represents that, like, even without the racial category, the non-white percentage and the Georgia index score are like pretty positively correlated. If you didn't have the racial score in there, which we played around with not putting it in or putting it in, it really doesn't change all too much about the outcomes of the score, just because, like I said, those racial burdens are felt in all the categories without that factor, but we just wanted to put it in to cover all the bases. So our last step is revising the index. And like I said, the same areas pretty much always pop no matter what. We pretty much always get the same values. We've experimented with different weights of categories. We've experimented with different ways to represent race, and pretty much all of these areas, these counties and census tracts, are always the most disadvantaged and the most burdened, no matter how you slice it. But we still want to be able to make our index the most accurate and the most descriptive to the world now. So our plan of action currently is to break those buckets down into the fractional scores that I talked about earlier. Instead of having a score of 0 or 1, no matter what, we want to be able to actually represent how many ways and how many factors a certain community is burdened by. So the best way to do that would be if one bucket has 5 factors, then we represent, like I said, that score as either 0.2, 0.4, 0.6, 0.8, or 1, to more accurately describe the specific burden felt by each census tract. And then we also want to collect feedback from our partners, from the community, from all of you, about how different buckets might be weighted differently. We could leave the buckets how they are now, all with different fractional values, or we could multiply them all by a factor and standardize them across the board. We don't think this would take a super long time because, like I said, we experimented a lot with different weights, and pretty much no matter what you do, the same places are the most disadvantaged. But we're still interested in hearing from people. So those are our plans to work on our second iteration. And then our other next steps are to add that EPD prioritization onto the map. So we want to be able to show people these are the 10 most important sites according to the current EPD prioritization, and these are the places that experience the most environmental justice burden, and see those next to each other and see if that EPD prioritization matches up with what we'd want to see for environmental justice considerations, or maybe if it doesn't, then the Georgia Water Coalition would take that information and push for policy changes. And then also, when we finish our index, we're going to publish it as a workable map layer, so anybody else could use it for whatever they might want to use it for, whether it was hazardous waste related or not. And then this is a QR code. It has our feedback page on it. It's like a survey on there to basically tell us what you think should or should not be included, what you do and don't like about the tool. You can explore the story map on there, like I said, get a little bit more information, and then you can also play around with that app and yeah, look through the map yourself and kind of play with it. So yeah, that's that. Cool. Thanks, guys.
We talked about how that the government would actually collect money when they sold the tires. I see all some of that, but no effort was made to actually put those funds towards what the government was saying it was going toward.
Yeah, so there's actually several examples of trust funds like that in Georgia. The ones that we're the most concerned with are the solid waste and hazardous waste trust funds. And yeah, at their creation and inception, there is no policy requiring legislators to actually use those funds for the things that they were designated for. So they were kind of just getting used for like general whatever, the Georgia General Assembly.
In general,
yeah,
right? Okay.
Basically. So that's what the Georgia Water Coalition and a bunch of other interested people and coalitions were fighting for so long, like 15 or 20 years. They wanted to make sure that those funds had to be used for the things that they were designated for, and they got that policy passed. And so now we're just wanting to improve on how they use those funds, make sure that they're used as best as possible. But yes, it's such a big step and a big win that they're used for the things they're supposed to be used for now.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah.
To add some local color to that, it's actually a constitutional amendment to the Georgia Constitution that got passed. So it had to go through the General Assembly, and then you all voted for that in 2020. Thanks, guys. Neil, did you have a question?
I've worked on these issues for 20 years. We talked about, I'm a lobbyist for the Water Coalition. The thing that I wanted to respond to your presentation is there are locations where resistance to correction is a lot stronger than other areas. Because I'm not statistically or mathematically gifted, I'm enumerate, but I speak well. And the one place in Georgia that was cleaned up under Superfund is Fort Valley, Georgia. The toxin was arsenic. There is no pro-arsenic lobby left in Georgia. Arsenic was to kill boll weevils. They got rid of it. The groundwater was loaded with arsenic. They had a mayor who was wide awake and got the EPD and made them clean up Fort Valley, Georgia. Downtown Fort Valley was loaded with arsenic. It's clean now because there was no institutional lobbying resistance to that cleanup. On the other hand, toxic coal ash, which is not even considered a toxic because of the strength of the lobby, is not being cleaned up anywhere in Georgia except where the power company wants to clean it up. And the only place that is at Milledgeville because they own the lake Sinclair, and they're the landlord of lots of tenants who have lake houses, and they wanted to keep their lake clean from their poison, so they cleaned that side up. Meanwhile, one of the largest dumps in the whole country was in Juliet, Georgia, where they're killing people wholesale. And the county, Monroe County, has had to pipe in city water to people whose wells are contaminated, and the power company has contributed $0 to that effort. So if y'all can figure out a way to make an index for the political power of the people who benefit from not cleaning up, I think that your effectiveness can increase, because then the people would know exactly who is causing their problem.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Neil. Questions? You have a question? Okay.
I have questions. Just wondering. So I know you said some of the sites were taken care of, like, are designated taken care of, some are abandoned. So are the Georgia Water Coalition sites being taken care of by the Georgia Water Coalition now? Or what does that mean?
So the Georgia Water Coalition members are just the members of the Georgia Water Coalition, like the physical location of the different, yes. Amy?
Okay, I'm gonna interrupt you.
Okay,
All right, cool, sorry. So they are being taken care of. That means, so whoever created the toxic waste is still a solvent company that is now responsible for cleaning it up. So if there was like I'm just gonna make something up now. If there was a paper mill there and it was deemed a hazardous waste site because they screwed up, and that paper mill company is still around and has finances and hasn't declared bankruptcy to get out of it, or they haven't just all moved to a non-extradition country, then that's considered like available. So that has like nothing to do with the Georgia Water Coalition and everything to do with the fact that whoever created the hazardous waste is still a responsible party, and that they can be sued and held accountable.
So
But there's plenty of factories from a paper mill that they just left the country. They don't exist anymore as a business, and that's considered abandoned.
I think the confusion and the question might come from the way that I made the map legend on the slide, because the dots for those hazardous waste sites in the map are actually diamonds, and the dots for the Georgia Water Coalition are actual dots. So those Georgia Water Coalition dots are actually not hazardous waste sites, they're just members of the Georgia Water Coalition, the physical location of the different organizations that are in the Georgia Water Coalition.
Alright, cool. I just didn't want to blame the Georgia Water Coalition for years. Alright, cool. Any other questions? Sir, yes.
Oh, sorry.
Hi, I want to say thank you for putting this on. We greatly appreciate the public knowledge that you guys are trying to, enhance. My question is, I probably missed the boat on this, but can you define hazardous waste for me? Is that like, trash or household, or is that like yard waste? I know that's very common, but you mentioned tires.
Yeah.
Can you expand on that a little bit?
So hazardous waste sites could be a lot of different things. Like Amy said, it could be a paper mill, it could be a landfill, it could be just some type of junkyard. Like it could really be anything. It could be a mining project, any site that created hazardous waste basically, which again could be a lot of different things. The Superfund, CERCLA, and the Superfund Act defines some hazardous and toxic waste sites. So I think there's 16 of those, like nationally recognized in Georgia. But the EPD also has like a broader and different definition of what counts for hazardous waste. So it's a little bit up in the air. It could be a lot of different things, but the EPD identifies over 400 hazardous waste sites in Georgia, I want to say. So there's just so many different things that they could be, but no, it's not typically yard waste or home waste. It would be like more large-scale operations that created a hazardous environment and like environmental degradation or potential for environmental degradation in the area.
I should never squat. Any other questions? deal?
Hazardous wastes are designated by the Environmental Protection Agency of the United States government. Coal ash is not a hazardous waste, but it has hazardous components. This is known as bullshit.
That was a mic drop moment. Yes, so for sure, also, we will have a link to what the specific governmental definition is to hazardous waste. We'll get that up there. But it is, as you can tell, there's a lot of anger about what gets decided to be hazardous waste and what doesn't. Any other questions? Yes.
Hi, Ashlyn.
There's no way this goes well.
Hi, Sierra. I was wondering what motivated you to get into this line of work and start this project, but also what you think affects you most about the work that you do.
I started school for environmental science. I was just always really interested, and then got into maps by accident. And I love maps. I love the, something that's always kind of plagued me about environmental science was being able to talk to people about it or not really being able to talk to people about it. And the like barrier between scientific information and knowledge and like public knowledge. And I really liked that about maps, that you can communicate information to people in a really easily digestible way. And having that spatial reference, I think, gives people a lot more information and allows them to like put themselves into a situation and contextualize it around their own life and space. That's why I like maps. And then Science for Georgia, it was just kind of a perfect marriage. That's like what they're for, communicating science to the public. So when they came to me with this project, I was really excited about it. And I started with environmental science anyway, so I love environmental issues, and environmental justice is one that's only kind of recently come into the forefront of environmental science. So I think it's something that affects all of us, the same way that like racism affects all of us, really, because it affects the people in our lives and the people that we care about. And I just want to do what I can to work against those things.
All right, that was like the most gratifying thing ever, so thank you. All right, you have one more question? Sure.
Just wanted to know, what do you guys have like a success story in addition to like the amendment of the Georgia Constitution that you guys have achieved recently, either Science for Georgia or the Justice for an Environment?
I was gonna say, I'm like a brand new intern guy, so I'm gonna pass this one off to Amy.
Thanks for that softball. I love to brag about us. Completely unrelated to the environment, we started an education and workforce. We started working in that in 2020. We had that speaker series. A year later, we had a resolution passed about literacy. A year after that, we had a literacy council started, and then just 3 months ago, 2 major literacy bills were passed in the Georgia General Assembly. So I'm not going to take credit for all of it, but like I am, because I'm standing here. So that was a huge success for us. So very excited about that. Can you think of any others?
We had our EJ conference.
Right. Thanks, Lewis. So it's amazing when you work together. And we've hosted the Environmental Justice and Climate Protection Conference for the past 2 years, and that's been a huge success. Standing room only. Great coalitions have come out of that. This map is now going to be used by other partners because of that. So we're very proud of that. It's going to be again next summer, so you should come. So thank you for that softball. Also, thank you for the best speech ever by an intern for prompting that. We're going to put that on the internet. Sorry, Sierra. All right. Any other questions? Yes. talk more specifically about a few examples of the burden of the environmental degradation in some communities in Georgia?
Like specific hazardous waste sites?
So like a specific burden on a community caused by environmental injustice
Okay,
or health. Or I can take this for
you
you.
can take this one, Amy.
Yay! Is that so? A couple things. They've done a bunch of studies about how historically redline communities have worse air quality just across the board. So if you look at that and then you dig deeper in those historically redline communities, then because of that air quality and everything else, there's a higher incidence of non-communicable diseases like diabetes and asthma and other things. So it's kind of this cascading offense. And just for people who might not, the redline communities were created in the early 1930s. Does that sound right? Where the U.S. government said certain communities were not like stable and good to invest in, and that was pretty much based on racial barriers. So it's been an historical injustice since then. Okay.
I knew that, but the question is more about public health and the impact on specific communities in Georgia.
Oh, great. Okay, sorry. Thanks for the clarifying question. So public health. So like I said, all those historic questions, those communities, the public health burden is a lot higher because if you've got asthma or diabetes or all of those things, the burden on the public health state, because they've all got non-communicable, long-term, lifelong diseases, so then your burden on public health is a lot higher. So then you have unhealthier communities in general. So they have lower life expectancy and they're kind of trapped in this cycle of poverty because it's hard to have a job and go to it 5 days a week if you're sick all the time. Did that help? No? We're gonna win. We're gonna win.
You gotta say cancer.
Oh, specific research about, like, pick out one or two communities, but research specific.
Specific communities? I have to get back to you on specific communities. But there you go, Fort Benning. Thank you. Fort Moore. Yes. So there you go. And near, okay, I'm gonna get this right, near Augusta, there's Plant Vogel. That whole area of the state is kind of I'm gonna use Neil's words here, shit show. Sorry, those you're gonna have to beat that online. So there's definitely a higher incidence of cancer and all of that in that area near there.
Monroe County's loaded with cancer from wells poisoned by coal ash.
There you go, cool.
Predictable, foreseeable, and predicted by people that lived there before they built the damn plant. I fought those plants in 1974.
Okay, so any other questions? No, all right, we're gonna end now. Thanks, Theo.